BioCentury This Week is brought to you by Evotec. Evotec is a life science company pioneering drug discovery and development by integrating deep disease expertise, AI-driven innovation, and advanced technologies. Working across modalities, Evotec's fully integrated R&D value chain and flexible partnering models accelerate the journey from concept to cure. A key area of focus is cell therapy, where Evotec leverages cutting-edge iPSC technology, manufacturing know-how, and translational capabilities to deliver scalable, off-the-shelf solutions for complex diseases. From discovery through GMP production, Evotec supports the development of cell-based therapies, advancing regenerative medicine and bringing transformative treatments closer to patients.
Novartis is getting 3 late-stage muscular dystrophy therapies via a $12 billion takeout in what is the Swiss pharma's biggest deal in a decade. And more deal-making. A busy week for M&A last week. Alkermes hopes to establish its commercial presence in narcolepsy via a $2.1 billion buy of Avidity, and taking N-of-1 base editing therapies into broader populations. Takeaways from BioCentury's conversation with David Liu of the Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard. Plus, promising data sparks a clinical opportunity for Parabilis. I'm Jeff Cranmer, and this is the BioCentury This Week podcast. I'm one of the executive editors here at BioCentury, and joining me today are my colleagues.
Simone Fishburne, Editor-in-Chief.
Paul Bonanos, Director of Biopharma Intelligence.
Selena Koch, Executive Editor.
And Lauren Martz, Executive Director of Biopharma Intelligence.
All right, Simone, like me, just off the plane from Shanghai, feeling a little jet lag, but very, very energized. How was your week in Shanghai, Simone?
Pretty exciting, okay? So much energy at this conference. I think we probably say that every time because I feel like China biotech only has sort of 2 levels, like highly active and super highly active. There's no kind of, slow day there. But, I know there's a podcast that we did specially at the meeting to wrap it up. And I really encourage people to listen to that one. And I'm going to tell you some of the highlights for me of that meeting that might tell you why you should go and listen to that one. Obviously, the week kicked off with this big deal between Innovent and Takeda with a $1.2 billion upfront. And Paul, you did a great story on that last week, I think putting it as the second biggest ever. But I could even say, although there was a lot of buzz about it, nobody in China is surprised about this anymore. The China ecosystem has a lot of confidence in what they're doing, in their ability to compete globally, in their ability to take anything that requires an antibody and engineer the heck out of it and do it really fast and well and generate data. And Jeff, you might allude to this in a minute. The Hong Kong Stock Exchange for biotech is doing remarkably well. So there's sort of, I would say, quite a lot of buzz there and various threads that are coming out that we're seeing how that ecosystem is maturing, seeing a next generation of biotech leaders coming up who don't necessarily feel that they need to gain their chops outside of China. For example, in the US, there's a lot of going on domestically where they can hone their skills. That's just, one of several things now that we'll tap into is, RNA, the next frontier. What they've done for antibodies, can they do for RNA? So, Jeff, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, speed. Like my trip started with a ride into town on the maglev train at 301 kilometers per hour. And I think that's
mine was terrible. I took like an hour and a half to go very little distance.
Yeah, you got the one New York cabbie in Shanghai. I actually had a terrifying cab ride or two. I actually screamed in my cab as he launched his electric vehicle within 1 inch of another car that was attempting a multi-point turn. And when we got out of the cab, I said, man, you're ready for F1. And he understood me and laughed. But yeah, I think it's just the speed, the ability to turn over things quickly, like back to cars. Literally every car in Shanghai is a brand new electric car. Suffice to say, there was a McLaren parked in front of the hotel. But yeah, a lot of first-time folks. We went out to the Zhangjian Life Sciences Park. And for me, it was surprising to see so many Western companies with their incubators set up there. I think we saw Bayer, we saw a whole bunch. And indeed, Western companies are all over the place. As our CEO just said on our editorial call, or shared a picture rather, Shanghai's tallest building illuminated in blue with Pfizer's name written down the side. So Western companies are waking up. A lot of folks at our conference there for the first time wanted to see it with their own eyes. But even they're like, I'm going to have to like convince people in my home office that this Shanghai thing is for real.
Jeff, when you started talking about speed and cars, I thought for sure you were going to pivot to CAR Ts.
Yes, well.
Yeah, 'cause there's a great precedent of ESA Biotech showing like China speed through in vivo CAR T, early clinical development there.
And that's...
Selena, it's interesting that you say that because, and I think we should stop because we'll send people to the other pod.
Yeah.
But that inside China is considered probably one of the seminal deals. Like there are certain nodes on the pathway. I'm not sure that everybody in the West understood the significance of it, but the idea of a company in Europe deciding it's got only so much money and how's it going to get its data and going to China to do those early clinical trials, the ecosystem there like lauds that and thinks that is the way things will go. So really good call out by you on that one. Yeah.
Yeah. I was, it's sort of like a Stockton to Malone thing. Selena, I was just sort of setting you up for your slam dunk there. I will say that JP, the CEO of SO, was a very, very popular person at the meeting. And with that, look out for BioCentury This Week, live on tape from Shanghai. It's a good one. We had the CEO of Duality, we had the CFO of Akeso, and we had one of the top guys from Charles River on the podcast. All right, I'd like to bring in Paul now. Paul has been busy. He wrote about Innovent last week. Yesterday, he took a little break from playing baseball in the yard or watching football, or whatever he gets up to down in Florida, to write about Novartis. Novartis getting 3 late-stage RNA therapeutics for muscular dystrophies via a $12 billion acquisition of Avidity. Paul?
Yeah, so it's a big deal even for a company of Novartis' size. We've written about how Vas Narasimhan, the CEO, said he prefers smaller deals with big potential. So presumably Novartis believes the assets it's getting from Avidity are potential multi-billion-dollar sellers. That's what Vas says he's always looking for, high-value programs. And just to clarify, when we talk about getting assets, yes, Novartis is buying the whole company Avidity, but it's also planning a spin-out. So we'll get to that in a second. They're doing the deal to get 3 late-stage programs, all for different types of muscular dystrophy. They could all be on the market in the next few years. Avidity had been lining up submissions for 2026. All 3 are antibody-oligonucleotide conjugates. We talk about ADCs, antibody-drug conjugates, all the time. These have an oligo linked to an antibody for specific delivery into cell types or tissues. And in this case, all 3 have DEL in their names, short for delpacibart. That's one component of the therapies. So Delzota is for Duchenne muscular dystrophy, specifically for exon 44 skipping. That has shown both biomarker and functional improvements in the clinic, and Avidity thinks it can submit for accelerated approval next quarter. There's Deldesiran, that's for myotonic dystrophy type 1, DM1. And then there's Delbrax for, and this is a mouthful, fascioscapulohumeral muscular dystrophy. I hope I said that right. Those latter 2 programs have both generated clinical data already, more due by the second quarter of 2026, and they could go to regulators by year-end next year.
Paul, so, we're seeing a fair number of deals at Novartis, some of them since Ronnie Gall joined as Chief Strategy Officer. And then this one in the antisense space sort of comes on the heels of they've got Leqvio, right?
That's via a very large deal with the Medicines Co. To obtain the Medicines Co. to acquire it in, I think, 2019. And that's before Ronnie Gal's time. But that was 9.7 billion. This is even bigger. Yes.
And they have one against Lp(a). Both of those are sort of in the cardiovascular space. It feels like this modality is one that they're moving into. They're putting more money into. They obviously feel that they've got good traction there. It's probably been commercially de-risked and maybe even scientifically de-risked, or if that's the right word. So I don't know, Selena, Lauren, how do you look at this technology in what Novartis is doing and maybe even other companies? Do you think it's a sign of things to come?
Yeah, I was going to say we should bring it in Lauren, because she recently just spoke to Tony Wood at GSK. They stopped their sort of AAV development, but they're kind of really doubling down on RNA modalities. So maybe she wants to talk about that.
I think just the fact that we're seeing multiple large pharma companies exiting gene therapies or gene editing therapies, or at least deprioritizing some of these and looking more into the oligos, the siRNAs, all of the RNA-based modalities. I think that's just a testament to where this modality stands. It's relatively de-risked. There are multiple programs on the market that, commercially are relatively de-risked too. And you've also got the fact that with a CRISPR-based therapy, for multiple indications, you're not actually seeing necessarily more knockdown of whatever the target is than you might see with an RNA therapy like this. It's opening the world of targets to something that you can't address right now with more of the traditional modalities. And it seems to have a more de-risked path than some of the even newer modalities than what we have for potentially comparable efficacy and long-term efficacy, just not one and done. Yeah, I think more to come from the pharmas probably.
I think that comparison to gene editing is really interesting, because there was a moment in time where is gene editing just going to supplant all of these RNA modalities? And that just hasn't been the case at all.
Yeah, I think we also have to give some credit to Alnylam, who really did the heavy lifting on a lot of this. It was not a short journey, one of the 20-year overnight success stories that we talk about. And they, as a company, have really dominated this space. And now there are other companies, obviously with products, many of those, came from that technology. And I think we don't know yet whether gene editing is sort of just partway through its journey and going to make it. There seems to be I don't know if I would call it cyclical, but certainly something like a sine wave going up and down there on gene therapies. But there are lots of reasons, and there are people who, even in the heyday, which is just a few years ago, of gene therapies, were saying logically these antisense or even mRNA, siRNA modalities carry lower risk and can do the same thing. There's still genetic medicines. There's still giving you the same kind of biological risk profile or lower biological risk profile, say small molecules ever will. So there's still a lot of the things that gene therapies do, these modalities do, without perhaps some of the drawbacks.
Tony Wood made a really interesting comment, which is that it's all about the durability. I don't think anyone expected these oligotherapies to be as durable as they are when we set out. RNA inherently is unstable. And so there's been a lot of work going into making these more stable. And the fact that you could treat someone and have it last for 6 months makes a huge difference when you're comparing it with other modalities as well.
We were at our bioequity conference. I talked to somebody at Alnylam about that, who said it's really they get trapped in the endosome, but then they can leak out slowly. So actually you turn that to your advantage, because you get a bit of a time release and an extended activity, which is kind of neat. And yeah, I don't think that was expected.
Simone, you mentioned Novartis's experience with inclisiran, Leqvio, in this modality. A lot of their deals are into adjacent areas or other areas that they have experience with. And I thought I'd just mention also, this takeout builds in musculoskeletal disease, and Novartis has had a lot of success in spinal muscular atrophy with that gene therapy. So this is adjacent to that. And Novartis also said it's complementary to its neuro offering. So it's also adjacent to their MS drugs. And that's another area that they're building in with their deals. They've done successive deals in kidney disease as well. They've done a whole lot of deals. This year, this is the fourth pretty big one with Tourmaline, Regulus, and Anthos coming in. Last year was Morphosis and a couple others as well. They've done a lot of deals since bringing in Ronnie Gall as the gatekeeper, looking for high-value products. So I just thought I'd mention all of that.
And the Regulus deal brought in earlier this year a microRNA technology. Paul, there was a spin-out in this deal.
Yes, I did mention that. So Avidity has some more preclinical programs, a couple of mRNA degraders for cardiology indications, and those are going into the spin-out. 2 rare cardio diseases associated with specific genetic causes. Avidity also has 2 partnerships of note, BMS in cardiovascular indications and with Lilly in immunology. The deals also go into the spin-out. And although Novartis gets the existing AOC platform, that's antibody-oligonucleotide conjugate platform, that it makes the conjugates from, Avidity says the spin-out will be able to iterate on it in cardio disease to make technological modifications and maybe next generation products. So there's still some room to innovate there. And the chief programs officer at Avidity will become the CEO, and the CEO will become the chair of the spin-out. So retaining leadership continuity.
All right, so the other big deal last week, Alkermes. Lauren, you just wrote a story a couple of weeks ago about some really interesting narcolepsy data from Alkermes as well as Takeda, both leaders in the space. And now we see Alkermes making a play for Dublin, Ireland-based Avidity Pharmaceuticals. Tell us a little bit about that.
Thanks, Jeff. Through this deal, they gain an approved drug for some of the symptoms of narcolepsy, which is Lumryz sodium oxybate. I think this deal really does 2 things for Alkermes, maybe more. It gives them this commercial stage product, which may be complementary to the internal programs that they have. It also gives them a commercial infrastructure in the sleep space, which is something that they didn't have. So the story that we wrote recently was about phase 2 data for the orexin 2 receptor agonist that Alkermes has. This is a new class in narcolepsy. They're slightly behind Takeda, which just released phase 3 data for their program. As a new class, this works to replace the functionality that's lost specifically in type 1 narcolepsy when these patients don't have the ligand or high enough expression of ligand for this receptor. So these drugs are taken during the day to help people stay awake. Alkermes thinks they may have an advantage there as a once daily, once in the morning therapy. The sodium oxybate class of therapies is used at nighttime to help patients stay asleep. This particular one is also dosed once when patients go to bed, which may be a differentiation in that space. So there are these 2 programs in the narcolepsy space. Both could potentially have a dosing advantage. And as this company is preparing to advance this in this new class in the orexin 2 receptor agonists, they now are inheriting this commercial structure that's capable of working within the narcolepsy space.
All right, we are going to take a quick break and we'll come back to talk base editing.
BioCentury This Week is brought to you by the 5th East-West Biopharma Summit in South Korea. An arc of innovation is emerging across Asia, and Western biopharma leaders are taking note, from cross-border deals to new cos. In March 2026, the 5th BioCentury Bay Helix East-West Biopharma Summit visits South Korea for the first time. Meet the biopharma leaders putting Korea innovation on the global map. Learn why Korea has become a clinical trial and manufacturing hub. Discover if Korea is the next hotspot for new co-formation. Plus meet biopharma innovators from India to Singapore to China and Japan. Register now at biocenturyeastwest.com.
And we're back, and I just wanted to give you a little shout out. Simone will be taking BioCentury This Week on the road to Cambridge, Massachusetts. So just wanted to give a shout out to our Boston listeners. We will be on the road November 6th in the Boston-Cambridge area for K Blockbuster Night. I'm sure it will be golden. Join us at Venture Cafe Cambridge and watch a live recording of the podcast with special guests joining Simone to discuss Korea biotech. Register for free at venturecafecambridge.org, or you can hit up our buddy Josh Berlin, our head of BD, on LinkedIn. You can hit me up as well to learn more, and we hope to see you there. Well, David Liu joined our colleague Danielle Golovin in conversation recently, and we ran a Q&A in BioCentury. And here with some takeaways, Selena.
Thanks, Jeff. I guess there were two things that really struck me about what he said to Danielle. First is that his lab is working on a technology that could kind of overcome one of the big issues with base editing that makes it hard to build a business on it. One of the great things about base editing is it goes after causal biology pretty much by definition. It corrects a specific point mutation in a specific gene, and often that's used for N of one type bespoke therapies or N of a few, right? So super ultra rare indications where the economics are hard to work out from a business kind of perspective. So now they're working on something over there where you're still changing a specific base, but instead of doing it in a gene that causes, a specific disease, they're trying to do it in a gene that causes many diseases. So for example, there's a kind of wide range of diseases that are caused by premature stop codons. And so they now have a technology that can recognize this premature stop codon across many different genes and therefore across many different rare diseases. And so once you start aggregating up these ultra rare diseases, maybe the economics can change. So I thought that was kind of an interesting future direction of the technology.
Good stuff, Selena. What was your second takeaway?
So he mentioned in this interview that there are now 23 base editors in the clinic, which I had not realized there quite that many had advanced to the clinic. So Danielle then went in a second story, she rounded all of those up, kind of assessed their early track record. So 13 of them have produced initial data, and all 13 of them have made the intended change to the base edit, and all of them have moved biomarkers in a direction that indicates clinical activity with, except for one case, mild manageable safety. So when I think of like just early clinical track records for, say, gene therapy, other new modalities, you'd be hard pressed to find one that's looking as promising, I think.
So Selena, I think for many people, he's a very known name, but some people probably know less about him. So just for context, he's founded some pretty big companies in this space. I imagine we expect to see more. Do you want to just fill in anything on the background of David Liu for our listeners?
Well, base editing, that technology led him to found a company called Beam Therapeutics, which is still a leader in that space. After base editing, which he invented around 2016 and 2019, there's a next generation technology called prime editing that can do some things base editing can't, that he also invented. Base editing can change something like 4 of the 12 possible base pair changes. Prime editing can hit them all, and it can do some small insertions and deletions. So that's an exciting development off of base editing. That led to a company called Prime Medicine, which is so far the first and still only biotech to bring a prime editor into the clinic. That's an area to watch in the future. But then a lot of the work, those 23 trials we're talking about, a lot of those are still academic. Because as I said, the business proposition here is still an area that needs some fleshing out.
Yeah, he's published more than 275 papers, inventor on more than 110 issued U.S. patents, and just a laundry list of prizes that he has won. And those companies, quite a few, we're watching quite closely. Enchroma Bio, Exotherapeutics, Pairwise Plants, a few of his other companies as well. Okay, well, I'd like to bring it home by heading to the clinic. Parabilis, that's a company led by Matai Mammon, had some pretty promising data last week. And Lauren, you took a little break out of your busy week to write about it. What did you learn?
Yeah, so these were the first clinical data that we've seen for FOG-001, which was the beta-catenin TCF interaction inhibitor that Parabilis has been working on. The data were really encouraging. So at ESMO, they presented data in desmoid tumors showing that of all the 10 patients that were treated with this at first, they all had some tumor shrinkage. Among the 5 in that trial who had at least 2 post-baseline scans, and it takes some time for tumor shrinkage to occur here, 4 had partial responses. So that's an ORR of 80%. And, we've seen this for other mechanisms and other cancers, whatever, but I think this represents a potential really big breakthrough because of the target. So beta-catenin is just one of those historically intractable cancer targets that everyone has been trying to solve for decades because it's mutated in a large percentage of cancers. So, in a normal state, its expression is sort of tightly controlled. It's regularly degraded. And in cancers, its expression, it can become more stabilized. And it's a transcriptional regulator that when it's active, it can activate the Wnt pathway genes, which can contribute to cancer in multiple different downstream ways. So you're sort of, when the mutations occur, you're setting off this pathway. And the problem is that the interaction that activates these cancerous gene expressions, it doesn't have the types of binding grooves that you need for a small molecule to be effective and selective. And this isn't the only function of this gene, so it needs to be done selectively to not disrupt normal function. So it's a very flat surface, and we just haven't been able to target it with small molecules. So what Parabilis has done is they've used their alpha helical stapled peptide technology to interact selectively in that groove. They also incorporate non-natural amino acids to give them more diversity in the chemistry that they can use here to make that binding selective. And based on the data, it seems that, we haven't seen this level of response. We haven't seen this level of safety. Often when you have a non-selective inhibition of beta-catenin, there could be lots of downstream safety issues as well. So it's a potential breakthrough. I think it's very exciting data.
Yeah, I think we saw some bone safety issues with previous programs. Like you said, it's a complicated pathway with lots of different complexes of proteins. And if you look at the diagram, it spins off in various directions, and there's canonical and non-canonical. And we've had disheveled inhibitors, porcupine inhibitors, so on and so forth, frizzled, went, but actually getting in the nucleus just at those transcription factors driving the addicted cancer does seem like progress. And this is originally came out of Greg Verdine's work, right?
It did, yes, the stapled peptide technology.
Yeah, I was going to say, so first of all, this pathway, I think by some distance has the best names in it, with frizzle, really cool proteins all the way down to porcupine. And there's a very nice graphic actually depicting this in the article that we put together. But yeah, this comes out of Greg Verdine's lab, stapled peptides. I think it's a very interesting twist. Selena, we talk a lot about all of these other modalities. This is a small molecule modality that is more engineering in the small molecule space and really trying to solve a problem that hasn't been solved for a long time. So if they can do that at a technical level at the same time as interrogating or accessing a pathway that's been resistant to drug development, that would be a big win.
Yeah, and so on Friday, they also showed that in the same trial, the efficacy wasn't limited to the desmoid tumors. They also showed efficacy at the triple meeting in multiple other tumor types that don't have a particularly high mutational burden. So that's where Parabilis is first taking this technology, because at that stage, there's a better chance that if you have a beta-catenin mutation, that's the mutation that's driving the cancer. So, you don't have to worry about additional mutations affecting the efficacy of targeting this pathway. But the company is looking to expand into more complex tumors, specifically microsatellite stable colorectal cancer, I think, in combinations, just based on some of the mechanisms of what happens when you do block this pathway.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see if their hypothesis about it being able to kind of turn cold tumors warmer and synergize with PD-1, if that, works out.
Sounds good. Well, I'll drop a link to all of these stories into the show notes. You can also find them at biocenturypodcast.com. And if you like what you're hearing, don't forget to like and subscribe. If you have a question for us, drop us a line. And coming up on Wednesday, we'll release the podcast that we recorded in Shanghai on stage with some special guests. So look out for that. And we'd like to thank Kendall Square Orchestra for providing the music to our podcasts.
BioCentury would like to thank Evotec for supporting the BioCentury This Week podcast. To learn more about how Evotec can support your goals through pioneering drug discovery and development solutions, go to evotec.com/innovation.